It is February 2nd, 1943. In the basement of a ruined department store in the city of Stalingrad, a German field marshal is sitting on a wooden crate. His name is Friedrich Paulus. 6 months ago, he commanded the most powerful army Germany had ever sent into battle. 300,000 soldiers, thousands of tanks and artillery pieces. The full industrial weight of the Third Reich pointed at a single Soviet city on the Volga River. Today, Friedrich Paulus is surrendering. He is the first German field marshal in history to be taken prisoner in combat. Around him, 90,000 German soldiers, all that is left of his once mighty army, are walking out of the rubble with their hands raised. It is -20 degrees. Most of them are frostbitten, starving, and wearing summer uniforms. Hitler had promised them the city would fall in weeks. They have been fighting for 5 months and 23 days, and they have lost, not just the battle. From this moment, the entire course of the Second World War turns. Before Stalingrad, Germany was winning. After Stalingrad, Germany never wins again. This is the story of how one city broke the most powerful military force the modern world had ever seen. To understand why Stalingrad mattered so much, you need to understand where Germany stood in the summer of 1942. Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, had begun in June 1941 with breathtaking speed. In the first 6 months, Germany had advanced further and faster than any army in history. 3 million Soviet soldiers had been captured. Entire Soviet army groups had been encircled and destroyed. The Wehrmacht had reached the outskirts of Moscow and Leningrad. It looked from Berlin like the Soviet Union was on the verge of total collapse, but it did not collapse. The Soviet army absorbed losses that would have destroyed any other military force on Earth and kept fighting. By the spring of 1942, the Eastern Front had stabilized into a grinding war of attrition that Germany was not designed to win. Hitler needed a decisive breakthrough. He needed to cut off Soviet oil supplies from the Caucasus region and sever the Volga River, the main artery of Soviet supply and logistics. The city sitting on the western bank of the Volga was called Stalingrad, and it bore the name of the Soviet leader himself. For Hitler, capturing it became personal. That decision, to make the capture of a name a strategic priority, would cost Germany the war. The German Sixth Army, commanded by Friedrich Paulus, reached the outskirts of Stalingrad in late August 1942. The Luftwaffe had already spent 2 days bombing the city into rubble. Entire city blocks were flattened. The oil storage facilities on the riverbank were set ablaze, sending columns of black smoke visible for 50 miles. German commanders looked at the burning wreckage and believed the battle was already won. They were wrong. The Soviet 62nd Army, commanded by General Vasily Zhukov, had been ordered to hold the city at any cost. Zhukov understood something that the German commanders did not. The rubble the Luftwaffe had created was not a clear battlefield. It was a fortress. Collapsed buildings became bunkers. Shell craters became fighting positions. Every ruined factory, every broken wall, every heap of twisted steel became a defensive obstacle that tanks could not cross and aircraft could not easily target. Zhukov ordered his men to press as close to the German lines as physically possible, so close that German artillery could not fire without hitting their own troops, so close that German air support became useless. What followed was a kind of warfare that had no precedent in the history of modern military conflict. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, rat warfare. Men fought room by room, floor by floor, staircase by staircase. A single factory building changed hands 15 times in 1 week. Snipers controlled individual streets for days. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier arriving in Stalingrad was less than 24 hours, and still they came. Zhukov fed reinforcements across the Volga River every night under German fire, replacing the dead as fast as they fell, keeping the city alive one desperate day at a time. While the grinding horror of Rattenkrieg consumed the city itself, something far larger was being planned on the Soviet side. General Georgy Zhukov, the most capable Soviet commander of the entire war, had been watching the German advance with a cold, strategic eye. He saw what Hitler had missed. The German Sixth Army pushing into Stalingrad was the point of a spear. But the sides of that spear, the flanks of the German advance, were held not by elite German divisions, but by Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian allied armies. They were under-equipped, under-motivated, and stretched thin across hundreds of miles of open steppe. Zhukov presented his plan to Stalin in September 1942. He called it Operation Uranus. The idea was not to reinforce Stalingrad and fight the Germans head-on inside the city. The idea was to let the Germans exhaust themselves fighting for every building while Soviet forces quietly massed on the flanks. Then, at the moment of maximum German commitment to the city battle, two massive Soviet armored thrusts would smash through the weak Allied flanks, one from the north, one from the south, and meet behind Stalingrad, cutting off the entire German Sixth Army, trapping 300,000 men in a pocket with no escape route and no supply line. Stalin approved the plan. And for 2 months, while Paulus's men fought and died for individual rooms in a ruined city, the Soviet buildup happened almost entirely undetected. Over 1 million Soviet soldiers, more than 900 tanks, and 13,000 artillery pieces were assembled on the flanks. The Germans, fixated on the city, barely noticed. On November 19, 1942, at 5 in the morning, 3,500 Soviet artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along the northern flank. The bombardment lasted 80 minutes. When it stopped, Soviet tank columns rolled forward through the frozen steppe in temperatures of -18 degrees. The Romanian Third Army, holding the northern flank, collapsed within hours. The next day, the southern pincer launched. The Romanian Fourth Army broke just as quickly. On November 23rd, the two Soviet spearheads met at the town of Kalok on the Don River. The trap was closed. 300,000 German and Axis soldiers were surrounded inside the Stalingrad pocket. For the first time in the war, an entire German army group was encircled. Hitler's response was immediate and predictable. He ordered Paulus to hold the pocket. No retreat, no breakout attempt. He promised that the Luftwaffe would supply the trapped army by air and that a relief force under Field Marshal Erich von Manstein would break through from outside. Neither promise was kept. The Luftwaffe could deliver less than a quarter of the supplies the trapped army needed each day. Manstein's relief force came within 30 miles of the pocket in December, close enough that German soldiers inside could sometimes hear the distant artillery, and then was pushed back by Soviet counterattacks. It never came closer. Inside the pocket through December and into January 1943, the German Sixth Army died by inches. Ammunition ran out. Food rations were cut to survival level and then below. Soldiers burned furniture to stay alive. Frostbite took fingers, toes, and feet. Men who had been the elite of the German military were reduced to fighting over scraps of bread in the ruins of a city they had failed to capture. On January 30, 1943, the 10th anniversary of Hitler coming to power, Hitler promoted Paulus to Field Marshal. The message was clear. No German Field Marshal had ever surrendered. Hitler expected Paulus to die in the rubble. Paulus surrendered the next day. The numbers from Stalingrad are almost impossible to process. The battle lasted 162 days. Soviet military deaths exceeded 400,000. German and Axis military deaths exceeded 300,000. Civilian deaths in the city itself are still not fully known. The total death toll across both sides is estimated at close to 2 million people for one city, on one stretch of the Volga River, in less than 6 months. But the number that changed history was not the death toll. It was 91,000, the number of German soldiers who walked out of the Stalingrad pocket into Soviet captivity in February 1943. Of those 91,000 men, fewer than 6,000 ever returned to Germany. The rest died in Soviet prison camps over the following years. When those 91,000 men, frostbitten, starving, their uniforms in rags, were filmed being marched through the streets of Moscow, the footage was broadcast across the world. In Germany, 3 days of national mourning were declared. For the first time, ordinary German citizens confronted the possibility that the war might not be won. The myth of German military invincibility, carefully constructed and fiercely maintained since 1939, was broken permanently. Every military campaign Germany fought after Stalingrad was a retreat. Every front contracted. Every victory was temporary. The strategic initiative on the Eastern Front passed to the Soviet Union and never returned. Stalingrad did not end the war. There were 2 more years of fighting and tens of millions more deaths still to come. But Stalingrad decided the war. The moment Paulus put down his weapons in that basement, the outcome of the Second World War was no longer in question. The only question left was how long Germany would take to die. That is the lesson of Stalingrad. Not that Germany was defeated by a stronger enemy, but that Germany was defeated by its own certainty. Hitler was so convinced the city would fall that he never prepared for the possibility it would not. He ignored his generals. He dismissed the intelligence. He made the capture of a name into a matter of personal pride, and 300,000 men paid for that pride with their lives. This is the Fallen Empires. Next episode, D-Day. The invasion that only worked because of the greatest military deception in history. Subscribe, and we will see you there.